Okay, we'd like to turn to John chapter 18. John chapter 18. We'll read the first 8 verses. When Jesus had spoken these words, referring back to John 17, he went forth with his disciples, that would be the 11, over the brook Kidron, where was a garden, into the which, that is, this garden, he entered, and his disciples, the 11. And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus oftentimes resorted thither with his disciples. Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth, and said unto them, Whom seek ye? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said unto them, I am. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. As soon as he had said unto them, I am, they went backward and fell to the ground. Then asked he them again, Whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he answered, I have told you that I am. If therefore you seek me, let these, pointing to the 11, go their way. This is a portion of John's account of Jesus in Gethsemane. Matthew, Mark, and Luke also give account of Jesus in Gethsemane. It is one of the most blessed events for you and I in the life of Christ. And I believe it's one of the most, if not the most, misunderstood event in the life of Christ. Jesus in Gethsemane, of course, is inseparably linked to the cross. And there are many blessed truths to be drawn from Gethsemane and how it relates to the cross. Again, you cannot separate Gethsemane from the cross. They're connected. What we read here took place on the evening of the Passover, the instituting of the Lord's Supper. And it involves the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. It involves the arrest of Jesus Christ. We want to develop the thought of the message around verse 4 and verse 8. In verse 4, Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, Whom seek ye? That's a key that's a key verse in understanding what Gethsemane is all about. And then in verse 8, Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way. What we read in those 2 verses is that Christ voluntarily and willingly submitted himself to arrest and ultimately to the death of the cross. And what we read in verse 8, this was substitutionary. If you seek me, let these go. let these go. Now, a mistake that many of God's people make is that they tend to view the death of Christ generically. That is, he laid down his life for sinners, and he did. But it takes on much more meaning and is far more impactful when we view it as he for me. He voluntarily, willingly offered up himself for me in my place. And here in Gethsemane, Jesus Christ intentionally, deliberately submitted himself to arrest. Again, read verse 4. And ultimately death for me. Yes, for sinners, for his people, but for me. And that is a truth that needs to grip our hearts. And when it does, it will have a tremendous governing influence in our lives. It will have sway in our lives. It'll transform everything about us. So our subject this morning is Christ voluntarily for me. Again, what we read here in John 18 is inseparably linked to the cross. So in order to understand Gethsemane, in order to appreciate Gethsemane, we must have some understanding of Christ's view of the cross. How did Christ view the cross? Did he view it with apprehension? I don't think so. So let's consider Christ's view of the cross. He was God. As God, he was omniscient. He knew all. He fully knew. He fully understood. He fully comprehended what was involved concerning the cross. We must believe that. He fully comprehended the fact that he would be crucified upon a cross. Now we're going to turn to more verses than usual, but let's turn to Matthew chapter 20. Verse 28. This is Jesus speaking. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus says, I am come to die for a ransom for many. John chapter 3. John chapter 3, verse 14, and as, again, Jesus speaking, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Talking about the Christ. Even so must. John 8, verse 28. And Jesus said unto them, when ye have lifted up the Son of Man, talking about the crucifixion, then shall ye know that I am he, and that I do nothing of myself, but as my Father hath taught me, I speak these things. In John chapter 10, verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. Verse 15, as the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Verse 17, therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it again, speaking of the resurrection. Verse 18, no man taketh it from me, Christ was not murdered. He laid down his life. But I lay it down of myself. I have power. I have authority to lay it down, and I have power or authority to take it again. This commandment to lay down my life and to rise again have I received of my Father. Then in John chapter 12, verses 32 and 33. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. This he said, signifying what death he should die. He not only came to die, he knew he was going to die. He knew how he would be lifted up upon a cross. So Jesus Christ fully comprehended the fact that he would be crucified upon a cross. He also fully comprehended the details of the crucifixion. Matthew 16, verse 21, Jesus is with the 12. Judas was there as well. And we read, from that time forth, began Jesus to show unto his disciples how, very important word that speaks of details, how that he must go into Jerusalem and suffer many things. He knew everything about the many things. The many things that are involved in the cross, Jesus Christ knew about every single one of them. From John 13:18, he knew of Judas's betrayal, which would lead to his crucifixion. From John 16:32, he was fully aware that the apostles would scatter and would leave him. And then from what transpired on the night when they came to arrest Christ, he was very much aware of what the Scripture said concerning his crucifixion. Notice in Matthew 26. This is Matthew's account of Gethsemane. Matthew 26, verse 50. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? He says, I don't need your sword. If I wanted to, I could call 12 legions of angels. The song goes, he could have called. I don't believe he could have. I'm not saying that song is unscriptural. If he wanted to, he could have. He didn't want to. But how then shall this, and this explains it, but if I were to call 12 legions of angels to deliver me, how then shall the Scriptures be fulfilled? That it must be. Speaking of his crucifixion. And again, this is manifest, that he knew the details of the crucifixion is manifested when he was on the cross, John 19:28. Jesus knowing he's on the cross, Jesus knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the Scripture might be fulfilled, saith, I thirst. He knew the order of the events. He knew the all things. Also, Christ fully comprehended the purpose of his crucifixion. Again, Matthew 20:28, even as the Son of Man Came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and give his life a ransom for many. John 10, I came to lay down my life for the sheep, which leads us to the next thing. Christ knew for whom he would be crucified. John 10, verse 11, John 10, verse 15. He would voluntarily, he would willingly lay down his life for the sheep. And then he turned later on in the chapter, I believe verse 26, he turned to the Pharisees and said, "Ye are not of my sheep. I came to lay down my life for the sheep." In his prayer just before he went to Gethsemane, he was very much aware of those whom the Father had given him. And it was for these, for me. So when Jesus Christ was in Gethsemane, did he view those whom he came to die for, did he just view them as a group of people? Or did he know them individually? I believe he knew them individually. And I believe in John 17, when Jesus prayed, he prayed for me specifically. And I believe when Jesus Christ was in Gethsemane, I, not just part of a collective group, but I as an individual was upon his mind. He's God. He's God. Christ viewed his crucifixion as a work given to him of the Father to accomplish. When he left heaven, he did so to accomplish the work that the Father gave him. And he knew the all things of that work. God the Father prepared a body for Jesus Christ. And he did this with a very definite purpose. He did this with a very definite design. And Jesus Christ, God in flesh, voluntarily took upon himself, formed in the womb of Mary, that God-prepared body, coming to earth to do the work that the Father had given him to do. He came from heaven to earth with a very definite work to accomplish. That work was for me. And he had me on his mind. Jesus said to Joseph and Mary in Luke 2:49, "I must be about my Father's business." Was that ever not true during the earthly ministry of Christ? I believe that was always his attitude. I must be about my Father's business. And he told the apostles in John 4, verse 34, "My meat is to do the will of him that sent me, and to finish his work." I have come to do the work that he sent me to do. And it is my intent to finish that work. And again to the apostles in John 9, verse 44, he said, "I must work the works of him that sent me." The chief work of Jesus Christ was to save his people. That's why he was called Jesus, Matthew 1:21. "I shall call his name Jesus for, or because, he shall save his people from their sins." And for this reason, he was called Jesus. That's his main work, to save his people. That work could not be accomplished without the crucifixion. Cannot be. And Jesus knew that. He must lay down his life. In John 7, verse 30, in John 8, verse 20, and in John 13, verse 1, The crucifixion is referred to as his hour. His hour. So he came with a purpose, and he knew the purpose of the crucifixion. I believe that we can say that Jesus Christ viewed the cross with eager anticipation. Christ, knowing what the cross entailed, fully knowing its purpose, and knowing for whom he would be crucified, had an eager anticipation of the cross. Hebrews 12 puts it, for the joy that was set before him. I believe that everything we have heard Christ say concerning the cross up to this point, he said with a tone and an attitude of anticipation. In John 13:1, this is the same night of Gethsemane, we read, Jesus knew that his hour was come. The hour for which he came into the world, Jesus knew that his hour was come. And what did he do that night? The apostles, they were discouraged. They were filled with apprehension and fear. And what did Jesus do? Knowing that his hour was come, he encouraged them. He encouraged them. Because Jesus had an anticipation. They were filled with gloom. They were filled with fear. But it's obvious from reading John 13, 14, 15, and 16, and even John 17, when he prayed, Jesus had no fear. He spoke words of encouragement to them in John 14. And when they went out of the upper room, John 14:31. So what he spoke in John 13 and 14 was in that upper room. But in John 14:31, he goes out of the upper room, and now they're outside. And he knew that his hour had come. And he knew what the commandment and the hints involved. Notice John 14:31. Let's turn there. John 14, verse 31. But that the world may know that I love the Father, and as the Father gave me commandment, okay, my hour has come. And part of that hour is the commandment of God that he must lay down his life. Even so I do. And then notice what it says. Arise, let us go hence. He knew everything that the commandment involved. He knew and fully understood what the hence involved. There was anticipation. So they're outside, and Jesus begins to speak to them again, John 15, John 16. And then in John 17, verse 1, notice what it says. He lifted up his eyes to heaven and said, the hour is come. The hour is come. Glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also glorify thee. And then he begins to pray for those whom the Father had given him. So that brings us to John 18, where we see Jesus in Gethsemane. We read in Matthew 26:36. Then, after he prayed John 17, cometh Jesus with them, the 11, unto a place called Gethsemane. A place called Gethsemane. What a place. Mark, in his account, says the same. Mark 14:32. And they, Christ and the 11 came to a place which was named Gethsemane. A lot of places in the Bible, but Gethsemane, oh, what a place. Luke, in his account, says in Luke 22:39 that he came to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples, the 11, also followed him. And then Luke says in verse 40 of Luke 22, and when he was at the place. When he was at the place. John, in his account, John 18:1, says that he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where was a garden, in which he entered, and his disciples. So from these four accounts, we learn that Gethsemane was a literal place. We learn that Gethsemane was a garden. It was a garden in the Mount of Olives. We read in Luke 22:39, he came out and went as he was wont, or as he was accustomed to do, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. John 18, verse 2, and Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place. He knew the place of Gethsemane, for Jesus oftentimes resorted thither with his disciples. So there is Jesus in a garden called Gethsemane. I believe it's very significant that he's in a garden. For it was in the midst of a garden that Satan approached Adam and Eve, or Eve. And Adam and Eve disobeyed the Lord and brought sin upon the entire human race. It was in a garden that Adam and Eve fell. It was in a garden that the entire human race fell. And now we come and Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he conquers. And he conquers. So let's look at what transpired in Gethsemane. One thing we need to remember in considering Gethsemane, all through the Old Testament, we see Satan doing everything that he can to prevent Christ from coming into the world. Every satanic attack upon Israel was an attempt to keep Christ from coming into the world. That was Satan's objective in the Old Testament, to keep Christ from coming into the world. But guess what? He came. He came. Prior to Christ entering his public ministry, Matthew chapter 4, Satan was there in an attempt to prevent him. He couldn't prevent him from coming. That's already taken place. So now he's going to try and prevent him from entering public ministry. But there was victory. And Christ continued. As Christ walked this earth, Satan fought him every step of the way. And he did everything he could to discredit Christ. And he did everything he could. He couldn't prevent him from coming. He's already been defeated there. Couldn't prevent him from entering public ministry. He's already been defeated there. Now Satan is saying, I have to keep him from going to the cross. He can't go to that cross. And Satan did everything he could. to prevent Christ from going to the cross. We read in John 7, verse 30, they sought to take him, Jesus Christ, but no man laid hands upon him. Why? Because his hour was not yet come. Satan would have killed Christ if he could have, but he couldn't. Because Christ could not die before his hour was come. And in John 8, verse 20, no man laid hands on him, for his hour was not yet come. Oh, they wanted to, but they couldn't. God's in control. We read in John 13:1 again, Jesus knew that his hour was come. His hour is come. That he should depart out of this world unto the Father. And just prior to entering Gethsemane, Jesus looks up into heaven and says, Father, the hour is come. And as Jesus and the 11 arrive in Gethsemane, Jesus says to them in Matthew 26:36, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. We then read in Matthew 26:37 that he took with him Peter, James, and John. So there's 8 over here, and Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John, and they go over here. And in verse 37, Jesus with these 3, Matthew 26:37, began to be sorrowful and very heavy. The word sorrowful means deeply grieved. Jesus began to be deeply grieved. It is a sorrow that goes to the innermost parts of his being. It speaks of affliction. It speaks of anguish of soul. He began to be sorrowful and very heavy, painfully distressed, tormented, tortured. This goes beyond physical, and again refers to inward suffering. What Jesus was now experiencing, you and I cannot know. You and I cannot imagine. Mark says in Mark 14:33 that as he walked with Peter, James, and John, that he began to be sore or painfully amazed and to be very heavy. Again, distressed and tormented. What Jesus was experiencing, you and I cannot. We cannot know. We cannot imagine. Feeling this sorrow, feeling this torment, feeling this anguish of soul, he says to Peter, James, and John, Matthew 26, verse 38, my soul is exceeding sorrowful. Exceeding sorrowful. Sorrow that exceeds sorrow. Even unto death. Even unto death. So affliction, anguish, torment was engulfing him. It was above him. It's beneath him. It's behind him. It's in front of him. It's on both sides of him. He's engulfed. So much so, even unto death. So much so that he felt that he could die. That would be a death before he got to the cross. And if he would die before he got to the cross, then Satan wins. And there is no salvation. And the whole plan of God is overturned. So here is the omnipotent Son of God, so inwardly pained that he says, I'm near death. And that's what Satan was striving for. Kill him. It was while in this agony that he instructed Peter, James, and John, tarry ye here and watch with me. The 8 are back here somewhere. And here's Jesus over here with these 3. And he says, you all stay here. And then it says in verse 39, he went a little further. I love those words. He went a little further. And I was on his mind. Mark 14:35 says, and he went further a little. Luke 22:41 says he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast. The point is this: Jesus is by himself. Jesus is where the other apostles did not go. 8 of them were left at the entrance of that garden. The other 3 went a little further, but he went a little further than them. He's where they cannot be. So we see him in agony of soul, going further for me. And he's in agony of soul. The 11 could not go with him. No one could. No one could go to this place where Jesus was. He went alone. And then we read in Matthew 26:39, and fell on his face and prayed. Mark 14:35 says he fell on the ground and prayed. Luke records in Luke 22:41 he kneeled down and prayed. But we see him there. He's engulfed with sorrow and anguish and affliction and torment and torture. What he's feeling defies description, surpasses human understanding. And there he is, in agony alone, and he's praying. Matthew records in Matthew 26:39, here's what he prays. If it be possible, let this cup, that word "this" is very important. Let this cup, something very specific and present, let this cup pass from me. Matthew records in verse 42 and 44 of his account that he prayed that prayer 3 times. Let this cup pass from me. Mark records in Mark 14:36, take away this cup from me. And Luke in 22:42 says, remove this cup. Every time it's this cup from me. What was bothering Jesus was in that cup. This cup. Again, Matthew tells us he prayed this 3 times. Luke says in Luke 22:43, and there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. He felt he could die. And God sends the angel to strengthen Jesus Christ. Luke also says in verse 44 of Luke 22, that he prayed being in agony. That is intense pain. A struggle for life. The Greek word agony is agoni, or agonia. It means to be in combat unto death. So Jesus is praying, he's in combat. Who's he in combat with? Himself? Oh, I don't think so. Or Satan. Satan. Satan is trying to prevent him from going to that cross. Jesus feels he could die. He's struggling to get to the cross. It says, being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, more intently and fervently. He's praying in such extremity that the anguish is so profound, the torture is so great, that Luke records in a sweat was as, an important word. Doesn't say that Jesus sweat blood. That's not what it says. As, there's a comparison being made. As it were, great drops of blood falling to the ground. So we see him there. The concentration, the passion, the struggle shows up physically. And his sweat was, as it were, great drops of blood falling to the ground. And what was he praying? Let this cup pass from me. This cup, this struggle that was going on. Take away this cup, this struggle. Remove from me this cup. Almost all interpret this to be Christ saying, Lord, if it be possible, let me avoid the cross. That does not line up with everything Jesus said of the cross prior to. He's praying about this cup, this struggle for his life, this battle against Satan. Again, I don't believe that the cup refers to the cross, but what he was experiencing at that very moment in Gethsemane. He was not looking to avoid the cross. He was looking to live so he could go to the cross. Jesus never drew back from the cross. And as he was praying, let this cup pass from me. I've got to get to the cross for Dan Gordon. That's what he's praying. It's an intense battle. While he was praying, he would go and check on Peter, James, and John. And they were sleeping. So then he would go to his spot and continue in agony and pray. And then he would go and check on Peter, James, and John again, and they were sleeping. And then he would return to his spot and pray again and struggle some more. And each time it was in agony. And each time he's praying earnestly, let this cup pass from me. Take away this cup from me. Remove this cup from me. And I was upon his mind. In Gethsemane, Jesus is struggling. You and I know nothing of this kind of battle. He was struggling with demonic forces to get to the cross for me. And I see him in Gethsemane. I see him there fighting the forces of hell for me to get to the cross. And in Luke 22:45, let's turn there. Luke 22:45. Just the first. Need to meditate on these words. And when he rose up from prayer, there he was in agony, struggling for his life to get to the cross. And when he rose up from prayer, that's victory. The cup has been taken from him. He has won the victory over Satan in Gethsemane. He rose up from prayer. People will go to the cross and they will say, Jesus won the victory at the cross. They'll go to the grave. Jesus won the victory. And all that's true. But how many people do you hear say, Jesus won the victory in Gethsemane? And he did. And he won the victory when he was born. And he won the victory when he entered his public ministry. I'm telling you, the battle was won in Gethsemane. And Jesus would proceed to the cross. The cup is passed from him. Notice first, again in Matthew 26. Jesus is risen from prayer. He's gone to the Peter, James, and John for the third time. And verse 45, then cometh he to the disciples and saith unto him, sleep on now and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. He knew exactly what was happening next. Verse 46, rise! Sounds like anticipation. Let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. He's saying, I know Judas is nearby. Let's go. Let's go. And this is where the account picks up. In John chapter 18, verses 2 and 3. Here comes Judas with his band of men. And then we read in verse 4, Jesus therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth. They didn't have to hunt him down. Oh, they thought they would, but he went forth. He wasn't trying to conceal himself. He went forth. And when he did, I was on his mind. Jesus voluntarily going forth for me. And then he asks a question. Jesus never asks a question for information's sake. Whom seek ye? Who are you looking for? They didn't even recognize him. They said, Jesus of Nazareth. He said, I am. And with those words, Christ unveiled himself, and the result was they went backward and fell on the ground. And had Jesus wanted to, he could have just left them there and went on his way. But he came to fulfill the commandment of the Father. He came to do a work. In verse 7, he asked them again, whom seek ye? And they give the same answer, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I've told you, I am he. And then hear what he says. If you seek me, let these go. He's speaking directly of those 11. If you seek me, let these go. But I believe I'm included in that as well. If you seek me, let Dan Gordon go. He's set free. Christ voluntarily for me. And I have been set free. Gethsemane will never know the extent of what transpired in Gethsemane. But I look at Gethsemane as one of the greatest victories that ever was. And Jesus proceeded from there. Satan, having done everything he could to prevent Christ from going to the cross, Jesus rises from prayer, submits himself to arrest, which would lead to the cross. Gethsemane is a place of victory. Victory for me. Brother Ben, if you'd come and lead us verse song.